Endo Pharmaceuticals. I'm Chrstine. I am running what is called the Adult Endocrinology franchise, and it is in its gestational period is what I would say. We are expecting an FDA approval of a low testosterone product at the end of December this year. We have a few other products quickly in the pipeline behind that. Prior to that, I worked at Wyeth Pharmaceuticals, know a bit of you guys in the audience, for 18 years in a plethora of roles and responsibilities in and around marketing, sales and marketing, and commercial operations, both within the U.S. as well as ex-United States. So I've really been enjoying all of the discussions here this morning and learning a lot, actually. And while I'm trying to focus, I'm emailing my team and saying, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So very interesting. Endo Pharma asked me to talk about direct-to-consumer, but I think it's an interesting thought because I think it's a little bit on the narrow side. So I'm going to try to add incremental value to the discussions that have happened here this morning. And really, to be honest with you, I mean, focus and integration is something that I think about on a daily basis. And hopefully my comments will help. I came from a very large company. Now I'm in a quite small organization. And while things are different, they're really not. Everything kind of is the same. And all the comments I've heard here today have been relevant before and are relevant again and probably will be relevant again in the future. So hopefully I can add some value. Let me see how this goes. Okay. Oops. Oh, I see. Okay. Sorry, guys. Oh, do you control it back there? No. Okay. Sorry, guys. Okay, so I wanted to, when I was framing my thoughts, I was thinking, you know, let's back up and talk about kind of things that, where do you start from, right? And we all know the life cycle stages of a product, right? I have some comments on that in a minute, but like, when do you involve, you know, key stakeholders, right? So for this presentation, we're going to talk about patients and consumers, but I will start to pivot and talk about all stakeholders. You've heard a lot of the panelists here discuss that as well, right? And then I love this discussion here about the samples and whatnot. Like, how do you coordinate sales force efforts? You know, sometimes, you know, in my new role, I find myself doing a lot of P&L management. I find myself becoming more of a business person than, you know, the old marketeer that I've been in my 21 years in the organization, and it makes you think differently. So when these gentlemen up here were talking about this wonderful, you know, program about sampling, I'm sitting here saying, you know, okay, I have a smaller product that is in the bag of the sales force, you know, with other products, and we need to amortize expenses, and samples are important access points, and yes, they're costly, and you have to manage all these things. And sometimes, you know, you don't get to make the right decisions about product samples and whether it's an E or whether it's an in-live person drop because you're tethered to other products in a portfolio. So those are other stress factors that marketeers, or at least people on my team, will have to think about. And I don't think that's anything different from small company to large company. And you can talk about that. Please ask any questions if I'm not clear. Big budgets, small budgets. How to zig when everyone else is zagging. I say to my team, pick your moments. You can't be everything all the time, and I don't think you want to be. Like I said, I've been here for 21 years in the industry. I've seen like really broad things. I've seen some really focused things. Yeah, you have to really figure out who you are, what you want to be, and where you're going to go. This slide, I used this slide recently in the last product I was managing for Endo in the osteoarthritis area. You know, it's motherhood and apple pie. We know the stages of a product's life. You have its introduction and its launch. You have its growth and maturity and decline. And then I put up what I feel is really happening, which is the, you know, the condensing of its time of product's life, right? Which is meaningful to all of us here, because when we think about all this technology and tactics and dollars and ROI, who you're going to talk to, when you're going to talk to them, all that stuff plays in, right? So my point is, given how long you have on a product, really changes what you're going to do and when. The product of which I just spoke, that we're waiting for FDA approval, we're waiting for FDA approval in December, and I'm literally having discussions with the board of directors on it's going to have 3 years life, 5 years life. I'm like, we're not even approved, seriously. But it's important to have those conversations because you have to understand those threats, and then also the dollars that the organization is going to give you, you have to place them. You have to place them properly, right? Hopefully that's good. That's my more realistic view of a launch curve this way. Yes? I agree. I'm not so sure. Yeah, I know. That's not my PowerPoint skill. Obviously, I'm not the creative person, but yeah, absolutely. But I'll tell you, it did get their interest, and then you did see the COO go, So at least, you know, it made sense. Thank you. You know, we all get this. I remember being a senior product manager on an antidepressant at Wyeth, and I was a consumer girl, and I was like so excited I was a consumer girl. And we were a team of like 6 people, and the gentleman who was responsible for, you know, healthcare professional promotion sat like 6 feet away from me in the cube. Integration never crossed our mind. He was doing his thing. He had a 7-box Vanguard model of how we're, you know, patient inflow, outflow. I'm over here talking to patient. I'm like, don't you think that information would be important to me over here? You know, because I'm the one pushing some of these patients to, you know, into your messages or into your doctors. So it was interesting. I saw the slide and I was thinking, yeah, that's funny. Mass media is definitely challenging, but, you know, we have a lot of opinions on that. But I do, when I was looking at this and thinking, you really do need to integrate and, again, pick your moments and talk about a little bit about that. We get this, and I didn't want to go on and on about how tough the environment was, but I was thinking, again, back from like a $3 billion brand to some of the smaller brands, $120 million brands, you know, that I work on. All these things are the same, right? You're launching into competitive marketplaces or saturated marketplaces. The category that we're going to launch into, should we gain the approval, I think is interesting. I think it's a noisy category, but for us, it's the category is largely underdeveloped. So I find it interesting because we're going to be the 3rd on market, and we have to do our share of heavy lifting as relates to broadening the actual diagnosis and the category, which is going to be hard for a 3rd comer with what we have and the size that we are. So again, trying to understand everything and pick your moments, that's what we're doing right now. And then again, remembering, do we have 3 years to live or 5? How fast do we have to move? And then pressures coming downward from the board on what sales goals are. I find it interesting. Let me see. Much of this we discussed with all of the other panelists. You know, product contribution is something in my role that becomes very, very visible in a small company. It's visible everywhere, but this becomes something quite interesting to discuss because product contribution is different depending upon who you're talking to and what it means. And again, that all plays into how much dollars you're going to get and where you're going to place them and what you do with them. Yeah, I have this thing, I think I was talking about this out at the break. As a consumer, and some of the panelists said this too, I think you have people who are desensitized to everything, all the information that's being pushed to them. I love all the technology. It's really interesting to hear. We're doing so many analytics, and God knows, on a daily basis, we have a crush of analytics that tell us who this doctor is, what they're doing. Same thing with patients, payers, caregivers, all of that, right? But at the end of the day, and we're trying to find what's the best way in with our messages, but at the end of the day, I think there is a lot of desensitivity going on. I think there's a lot of people that want to turn us off and get deafened by some of the information out there. So nothing more than what we've heard here, but again, one of the things I try to guide my teams on is know what your key messages are and understand how they look if it's said to a doctor, if it's said to a patient, if it's said to a payer, which is funny because we haven't talked about payer historically in this industry, but over the last 10 years, the payer has become increasingly important. Caregivers, patient advocacy, whomever it is, understand what your messages are and integrate those messages as well as the tactics. Again, coordination is key. I mean, I just threw this up here. You know, organization of key marketing elements and into a coordinated, harmonious whole. Everyone's really been talking about that, but I think also, too, your messages have to be there. It's not just your tactics, right? You have to be making sure. I remember a couple years back, one of the vendors that we worked with would talk about the warm handshake, right? It's what you're telling the patient so that when he or she comes into the physician's office, you make a connect. It's like just human communication, right? You're on the same wavelength. You're making the same conversation. So it's not just, it's funny, it's not just your vehicles or your tactics, but it's also what you're saying, it's your content. I think we've seen many of these graphs. I mean, on the stage right side of the graph is traditional. It's what we're all used to, right? Started with face-to-face, started with reps, moved into print. TV came along, you know, DTC, whether, you know, you have a company that's used to it or not, is becoming actually more of on the traditional side of things. And then on the stage left, all the other things that all these new technologies are, you know, how do you, again, get at these target audiences. And when I saw this graph, I said to myself, the way I look at it is not just like all the channels, but like the poor person standing in the middle, the doctor, the patient, the payer, the caregiver, the whomever. It's quite challenging to that person to make sure, especially if our messages are off, if your messages aren't orchestrated or coordinated. Can you imagine what that person in the middle is hearing or seeing? The least of all that you'll get as a result is confusion. I think one of the worst things you'll get is, annoyance or irritation and turn you off. And if it's, a physician and a rep has to stand toe-to-toe with that physician, and there's all these other tactics that we're using, and the rep is unaware of those tactics, that makes for a very arduous discussion, face-to-face discussion from a rep to a doctor. This is one of the things that we work on a lot. Sorry for the slide, it's not coming all the way up. But it's basically coordination. It's a lot what we discussed here, coordination of your non-personal selling efforts with your sales force. Your sales force is one of the people in the audience, the most costly tactic. We get that. It's their most productive tactic. One would argue the ROI of these technologies coming up definitely would rival that, which is good. But we still haven't gotten there yet. Like the one gentleman said, we were supposed to be, 2004, we were supposed to be more e-detail than, personal selling face-to-face, but that won't happen until 2024. And that might not even happen. I mean, we are very draconian in this industry, right? And from someone who has the responsibility of the financial health of a unit, Salesforce is still something that is very pharmaceutical, and it's extremely costly. And I was laughing to myself about the sampling program here. You had asked one question I wanted to ask, does sales leadership ever say, you know what, you're pulling my sales guys out of the field too much with the at-home business, managing the site, what did the doctor say, did I get an email, and they are becoming almost administrators at home versus are they selling? That's something over the course of my career, and especially recently, we get, right? How often are you pulling a rep out of the field to do administration work? He or she's supposed to be selling the product. And then that conversation starts to devolve down into ROI of the sales rep, ROI of that sampling program, ROI of the actual product sample, and then you're sitting here trying to figure out the escape velocity of the earth, all the while you're going, how do we get sales on the line? I don't even know how we got sales because everyone's over here trying to quantify what each tactic vehicle is doing, and instead of watching the business overall, that's what we're trying to do. So I find that's one of my interesting experiences in this industry. One of the things I want to say here is, and again, I think a lot of this is motherhood and apple pie, but it is almost, yeah, the technology exists, but it's coming back and really understanding where you belong, right? What your product is, where your business is, according to that product's attributes, and according to your competencies. Again, in the world I'm in right now, smaller company cannot compete with the behemoth on certain mass levels, right? I'm not sure I want to either, right? What is it that this product brings to your target audiences, be it a doctor, a payer, a patient, and how are you going to communicate those product attributes and benefits? How are you going to do it clearly, simply, consistently? Those are things. And I know that sounds very motherhood and apple pie, but really, I mean, those are the basics of communication. And I know we've done a lot of ROI analyses on every single tactic, whether it's a viz aid to a sample voucher. The reality is you really do have to know what you're looking for, what you're trying to do, and what you're looking for. I'm a big fan of metrics, but I think they're overdone. I think they're overdone in that, I'm always constantly asked, Chrstine, what was the ROI on that sample voucher? Chrstine, what was the ROI of that patient pamphlet that sat in the doctor's office? You're constantly looking at, oh, quick, let me get early indicators because we don't quite have hard ROIs. Here's my humble opinion. Make sure, again, you know where your opportunities are. Put your best tactic forward, whether it's a Salesforce or an sampling program, internet, online, whatever it is. Understand what measurements you want to take a look at to see, is that vehicle working? Is it doing what I expected it to do? Even if they're softer early indicators. And then the way I say it is like, step back for a second. Did we get the outcome we were looking for? Was it sales? Was it efficient sales? Was it percent brand awareness in a certain geography, certain category? a certain physician demographic, what was it? And then, make your course corrections if need be. I really do think, at least in my experience, over all the years, I've seen a ton of analytics, and we've talked, and I love the way the one gentleman says, just when you get one product manager going on, what this is, and then the metrics, and they move on to something else, and then you go back to, ground zero. That's very true. But at least, making sure you put a very clear view on what you're trying to do, and then guiding your teams, and that includes external vendors as well. I mean, these guys up here talked, very elegantly about, if someone came in with a bag of crap, like just, open it up. Say, here's where we are. There's this political sensitivity coming down from the top. Here's what our net sales goals are. Everything all the way to even Salesforce. There's a ton of Salesforce political landmines that people in my position, I'm sure you're out there, have. Like, you don't own them, they're a vehicle to you. But they are a very important sales deduction on a profit and loss statement. So they have to be doing what you need them to do, and you also have to manage the financial responsibility of them. Sometimes that's out of your hands. Again, integration, I think I talked a bit about this, but it's not just a vehicle. It's not just a channel. It's making sure, I've recently, again, I've been doing this a long time, and I've never had so many conversations about brand positioning than I've had in the last 6 months. But again, making sure you have a solid brand positioning, you've tested it, it's got rigor behind it, you believe in it, and then you're actually doing right by it by pulling through on it. Ensuring your products, your programs, and your segment marketing plans are all aligned with the brand marketing plan. Segment marketing, whether that's payer or different customers, you really have to make sure, you may not have authority over them, but you certainly do have influence over them, making sure that they are cascading down to their customers, whether it's key opinion leaders or a P&T committee at Blue Cross Blue Shield, making sure that your messages about your brand are being spoken appropriately to that customer audience. That sounds like it's easy to do. It's not, especially when you don't have authority over those groups, but it's critical. Short and long-term brand management, I love this one. This is one of my favorites. Again, everybody, management, executive management, and even C-level want to know what net sales you're going to put on, what's your profit margin, things like that. I think you really need to set up, what you're trying to do with the brand and when, right? There's short-term goals, there's long-term goals, and putting caveats all around that. And again, that will lead you to what your marketing objectives are, which again, cascade all the way down to what tactics, what technology. And then I think this team here spoke very, very well to a complete team mentality, advertising and marketing agencies all coming together and sitting at I think they call it PRC, we call it a mark review, making sure you're speaking, from one unified voice. Again, sorry, the title, it's just reaching, the right audience at the right time, and again, it's with the right channel. Do your work, do your due diligence, make sure you understand, physicians, they're all mobile now. They're not all, but they're highly skewed mobile, 80th, 90th percentile. What do you want to talk to them about and when? And one of the things I think that's important is, that life cycle, that, acute life cycle we talked about. When do you start talking to different stakeholders? And remember, on larger brands, we actually gated information. We went out to healthcare professionals first, then you followed by, if appropriate, patients that were sitting in physicians' offices, then if appropriate, followed by consumers, things like that. Nowadays, number one, because of the technology, but also because you have very acute life cycle curves, staying within the guidelines, I think it's important to understand when you speak to the stakeholders, key stakeholders, and what you say to them. I think it's changed. And one of the things we take a look at is buying cycle and interception points. One of the other panelists talked about this, and this is something that I think has proven very successful, at least in my career. Buying cycle, just like a consumer packaged goods, what happens at all the disparate steps of that potential patient's life, and with the doctor and the caregiver, and even your payers, what happens at every single one of those disparate milestones, from the patient's experiencing their disease condition at home, all the way through to, I walked to CVS, on Madison Avenue, and I fulfilled my script. What happens? What's their thinking at those times? Understanding that cycle and where you can speak to them appropriately is important. Planning process early, talked about insight-based research approach. Many of the teams here, a lot of these technologies nowadays, I love the way they say speak back, we get a lot of great information. I think This is a very interesting time in our industry, trying to get through some of the political, and the legal red tape, but there's a lot of great information out there. But regardless of how you get it, making sure you understand your stakeholders and their perceptions, and again, where your business is. Collaboration is key, tactical coordination. I don't need to talk to you about digital in the mix and social media for listening and testimonials, we've heard that. And then again, at the end, measuring the effectiveness of each medium individually and the mix as a whole. I am a big fan of, did the tactic do what you wanted it to do? And then moving on from there to say, did we achieve the goals we were looking for overall? More doesn't always mean more. I used to have big budgets and I love them, but then I look back on them and I say, wow, that was a huge burden. I worked on brand teams that had $165 million worth of overall marketing spend. That caused a lot of challenges. How you measure that? I mean, we were measuring every single thing. I don't know how we got anything done. But it doesn't always mean more. I like to tell my teams, pick your moments. Find out who you are, where you belong, and there's a spot for everyone. I think you have to be very sober to yourself. You have to be very clear to yourself on where you can win and where you can't. And I think integration is key. Whether you do it on a broad scale or a small scale, I think it's key across messages and tactics. Hopefully I provided some insights from some of the discussions we had today. Can I take any questions? There's a lot I couldn't put on slides, but I'd love to take any questions. No?